It's time to blast them on a budget with Lilah, undefeated slick shot. Not too long ago, my friends and I decided to create a pod of budget commander decks, and we set ourselves a $50 limit. The goal of this was to mix up the experience we were having at the EDH table and also get our deck brewing skills working, as we had a pretty reasonable but also strict budget constraint. As of now, our pod consists of 4 different commander decks, and those are Anya Falconwrath, Kellen the Kid, Fibblethip Lost on the Range, and my Lilah undefeated Slickshot deck. And I've been having a lot of fun playing this deck both within the budget pod and outside of it, so I wanted to make a quick deck tech about it for you all. So we're going to get right into it, and to start off, we're going to talk about the commander, who is Lilah undefeated Slickshot. Lilah is 1 and is it for a 3/3 legendary human rogue. She has prowess as her main keyword, and her one and only ability is whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery from your hand, you exile that spell instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do that, it becomes plotted. Now, when you plot a card, you can cast it as a sorcery at a later turn without paying its mana cost, and it'll just be exiled off to the side in plot. So the way I have Lilah built is pretty similar to a lot of Is It Spellslinger decks, with the main difference being we're going to be casting quite a few really overcosted and expensive Is It spells, and we're going to save those for later and double up on the value there. The mid game is going to mainly consist of protecting our board and creating a large army of tokens through all of these spell slinging payoffs. And at the end of the game, we're going to aim to swing in for lethal, triggering prowess a ton using those plotted cards and as combat tricks as well. And since I want to keep this deck tech on the shorter side, we're mainly going to focus on those Is It spells, some of the payoffs, and a lot of the MVP cards for the deck. The first Is It spell we're going to talk about is actually, I think, the most expensive card in the entire deck, and that is the instant from Lord of the Rings, Flame of Anor. Now, Flame of Anor is a modal spell. It costs 1 and Is It, and you can choose one of the 3 modes. If you control a wizard, you can actually choose 2 of them, and the 3 modes are target player draws 2 cards, destroy target artifact, and Flame of Anor deals 5 damage to target creature. Flame of Anor is not only amazing for its versatility, but also because it is one of the cheaper CMC spells that I'm going to be running for this in terms of the Is It ones for Lilah's ability. Now, most commanders are not 6 toughness or higher, so this is going to snipe most of the key creatures that people are going to put on board. Being able to spot remove artifacts is always going to be a solid thing, especially if I need to make it repeatable with Lilah's ability. And card draw is always amazing as well, especially if you're considering it draw 4 cards for 3 mana. Now, sadly, Lilah is not a wizard herself, but I do run 10 wizards in this list, and most of the time the 2 modes chosen per cast is going to be gravy, and the spell itself does quite a bit of work even choosing only one of the modes. The next Is It spell is going to be a card from the Doctor Who set, and it is Truth or Consequences. Now, this is a super fun spell, and it is 2 and Is It for a sorcery with Secret Council. Each player secretly votes for either Truth or Consequences, then those votes are revealed. You draw cards equal to the number of Truth votes, and then you choose an opponent at random. Truth or Consequences deals 3 damage to that player for each consequence vote. Now, if all 4 players choose Consequence, one player is going to take 12 damage, not you, of course. And then if you choose Truth and then the remaining 3 players choose Consequence, you'll draw 1 card, and then one of those 3 players at random will take 9 damage, and so on. This is a fun little mini game for the table to get everybody engaged and involved, and most of the time you're going to be choosing Truth for yourself, and the remaining players are going to choose Consequence, because most players are willing to risk taking 9 damage to the face to avoid you drawing cards. So yeah, it's just a fun little mini game that you'll get to repeat and also get some card draw out of it. The next spell is the most expensive mana-wise spell, and this is exactly the type of spell that I think gets the most value from Lilah's ability, and it is Magma Opus. So this is 6 generic, and is it for an instant? And Magma Opus deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. So you can hit creatures and face, tap 2 target permanents, then create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, and then you draw 2 cards. It also has its cycling ability where you can pay Is It hybrid for discard Magma Opus, create a treasure token. A lot of the times you can think of this card as you pay 8 mana and then you get this ability twice, once immediately and then a second one later. This is an instant spell too, so if you felt the need to wait until someone's end step to cast it, you have the flexibility to do so, though I think saving 8 mana is pretty insane, honestly, to do, though sometimes you might actually want to do this. I've actually won a game recently doubling and copying this card from Plot, and it allowed me to clear the board. Someone had a lot of tokens out. I was able to clear the board, tap down their big things, and then I swung in for like 70 plus damage with prowess triggers. So yeah, Magma Opus is definitely one of the best cards, I think, for Lilah's ability, based just on accumulated value from the plotting. Next up is a card draw spell, and it is called Practical Research. This is 3, and is it for an instant where you draw 4 cards, then you discard 2 unless you discard 1 instant or sorcery. Most of the time, we do not care if our instants and sorceries are in the graveyard. We can bring them back with things like Return to the Past or copy them from the graveyard with Arcane Bombardment. And a lot of cards actually care about the spells being in the graveyard itself, like Haughty Djinn, so we don't really care for discarding 1 or 2 instants. And being able to double up on this effect, drawing essentially 8 cards for the price of 5 mana, is quite a good rate considering Lilah's ability. So this is a solid Is It card draw spell that makes use of Lilah's ability very well. Next up, we have another little mini-game spell, and this is Steam Augury. It's 2 and Is It for an instant. This card's a lot like Fact or Fiction, almost exactly the same. And it reads, reveal the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of those piles, and you put that pile in your hand. The other goes in your graveyard. Like I mentioned before, we don't really care if instants or sorceries are in your graveyard, and a lot of the times we have payoffs for that effect, actually. Being able to copy this card or cast it a second time with Lilah's ability allows us to see quite a bit of cards and do a decent amount of card filtering for things that we want in our hand. The second to last Is It spell we're going to talk about is Galvanic Iteration. This is one of the cheaper instants that we're going to be seeing, and it is just Is It to cast. So this is an instant where when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, you copy it, and then you can choose new targets for the copy. It also has flashback as a little added bonus for 1 and Is It, so it's pretty easy to recur or recast again. Now this spell, it's very straightforward. I mean, Is It Spellslinger? You want to copy spells, cast as many things as possible, and get that storm count up. We don't care about storm count too much in the deck. There are a few storm payoffs, but this is mainly to just maximize the value. It's really great with Lilah's ability because we can plot it, save it for later, and then be able to copy the perfect spell, something like a Magma Opus or Practical Research. So we're getting tons and tons of value from the bank of cards that are in plot. The next spell is kind of a meme pick. This is the last Is It spell we're going to talk about, but I've done some really funny stuff with this card, and it is Role Reversal. Now, this is blue and Is It for a sorcery. You can exchange control of two target permanents that share a permanent type. So that includes things like lands. I could exchange a basic island for someone's Gaia's Cradle. I've exchanged two players' commanders before, and it is very funny. You can do it a second time with Lilah's ability, which I always thought is really funny as well. And yeah, just a super silly card, really funny, but it does have some practical uses that can change the game in a pretty chaotic and funny way. Moving past the is it spells, we have the payoffs for spellslinging. I broke this up into two different categories. The first one is going to be token creation, and we have quite a bit of token creation for casting instants and sorceries. We have Murmuring Mystic, Young Pyromancer, Talrand Sky Summoner, Shark Typhoon, Storm Chaser's Talent, and Eris Roar of the Storm. Most of these are pretty common. The only one I really want to focus on, I guess two of them, is Storm Chaser's Talent and Eris Roar of the Storm. With Storm Chaser's Talent, this is a new card from Bloomburrow, and that's mainly why I want to talk about it. It is 1 blue mana, and ETB, it makes a 1/1 blue and red otter with prowess. We really care about prowess. We want as many things on the board having prowess as humanly possible. But the other two levels, I'd say, are pretty decent, though they're a little bit expensive, so I would only do them as mana sinks if you don't really have much else to do. The level 2 is 3 and a blue. You can return instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, so another form of instant or sorcery recursion, which is quite nice. And then the level 3 is 5 and a blue. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you make a 1/1 otter with prowess. Now, this is a pretty insane payoff. Being able to make 1/1s by itself isn't that good for 6 mana, but making them with prowess just adds up a ton, especially in a deck like this where we're going to be casting spells constantly. So I think the level 3 itself is quite a solid payoff, at least for a mana sink, if you need something to do with all the mana that you're going to be getting. But I haven't really been able to get to the level 3 at all. I've only had the card for very little amount of time, so I'm still testing this, and it seems like a pretty solid pickup, especially for such a cheap initial cost. Next, we have Eris, Roar of the Storm. Eris is a 4/4 elemental warlock for 8 and is it? And it is very expensive to cast, being 10 mana, but it does have a discount built in. Eris costs 2 less generic mana for each different mana value among instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So most of the time you're going to be casting this for about 4 mana, and sometimes you'll even be able to cast it for 2. So I think this card is really awesome. It also has flying and prowess, so it has its built-in evasion and it has prowess, exactly what we want for the deck. And then it also has a third ability as well, where whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you create a 4/4 red dragon elemental with flying and prowess. So it creates flying tokens, it creates prowess tokens. They're pretty beefy to start, being 4/4, and you can do them on each player's turn. So this thing is going to be amazing as a token generation. I mean, it does everything. It cares about the instants in the graveyard, like we mentioned before, but it also has built-in evasion and creates some really disgusting tokens as well. Next, we're going to move into the card advantage section of the payoffs, and I have just two that I want to mention. The first of them being Archmage Emeritus. This is a pretty classic Spellslinger payoff card. It has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. It's 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2 wizard. So this is going to accumulate a ton of card draw, especially early on if you can get it up pretty fast. This card is a very well-known card. It's super strong. We all know this. And yeah, it's going to be able to help fuel you for your plotting and also the prowess triggers for later on in the game. After that, we have Emberheart Challenger. This is another new card from Bloomburrow, which I've been having a ton of fun with using in Arena. But this is 1 in a red for a 2/2 Mouse Warrior. It has haste, it has prowess, and it also has valiant, so it is just chock full of keywords. Its Valiant ability is whenever it gets targeted by a spell or ability that you control for the first time, you exile the top card of your library until end of turn, and you may play that card. So this is another light way to get some sort of card advantage. It's not the most useful in the deck because there's not too many things that target creatures. Like there are quite a bit of combat tricks, but other than that, you're not going to be triggering the Valiant that much. Though it will be quite helpful if you want to hit your land drops potentially, and also just be able to play things off the top with the impulse draw effect that it has. The last thing we're going to talk about are the MVPs for the deck, and these are mainly the closers or finishers, how we win the game with this deck. And the first one we're going to talk about is Arcane Bombardment. Now, this is a super popular card. This card is extremely fun to use, and it is an absolute house. It is 4 and 2 red for an enchantment. And whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, exile an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard, then copy each card exiled with it, and then you may cast any number of those copies without paying their mana cost. So this card gets out of hand super fast. It is specifically each turn, so you can use its effect on other players' turns as well. And it's just a great way to storm off, rack up that storm count, and accumulate value based on all of the instants and sorceries you've been casting throughout the game. This card pairs super well with Spellslinging in general, but it also does it with Lilah's specific Is It spells, because those spells are extremely expensive, so you're going to be able to again accumulate value or triple up on the expensive Is It spells that you've cast throughout the game. The second of the MVPs I want to talk about is Elemental Eruption. This is 4 and 2 red for a sorcery where you create a 4/4 red dragon elemental creature token with flying and prowess. But the awesome thing about this card is it also has Storm. So if I am racking up a ton of cards from plot with Lilah's ability, I can create an extremely large storm count and then cast Elemental Eruption, make a bunch of these elemental creature tokens with flying, and then I can use haste enablers like the card Burst of Speed to give them all haste and then swing in for lethal that way. This card is more of a for fun card for me, honestly. This card is so sick. It's from Outlaws of Thunder Junction Commander, one of the commander decks, and yeah, it's just a great way to storm off in the end and make a big wave of elementals that happen to have prowess. Now, the last card is probably the most reliable finisher in the deck. If you're playing a combat-centered Is It spellslinging deck, you absolutely want to have this card in it, and that is Balmor, Battle Mage Captain. This is an Is It creature that is a 1/3 bird wizard. It has flying, and then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. So this is how we turn all of those tiny little creature tokens from like Murmuring Mystic and that into massive trampling creatures. This is allowing you to do upwards of 100 damage to the table in one turn. You rack up all of those cards from Lilah, as I said before, and this is one of the major spellslinging payoffs that will help end the game and give trample, which is important to stomp over all of those small token strategies. And before we close out on the deck tech, I do want to give one quick shout out to the card Bria Riptide Rogue. I did mention this in my top Bloomburrow cards, but when I do decide to play this as a less budget deck, I mean, it goes from like 40 to 50-ish, $60. When I add this card in, yeah, I've already talked about this card, but I do run Bria in this deck, and she does put in a ton of work giving all of the creatures prowess. So it's very similar to an effect like Balmor's, but we also can make things unblockable instead of trampling over. So that's going to be it for my Lilah Undefeated Slickshot budget deck tech. Making these budget decks with my friends has been a super fun experience, and if you haven't done so already and you have a pod or friend group that you are really close with, I highly recommend trying to give this a shot. I can talk about some of the other decks that my friends have made. They're really interesting and super fun to play against as well if people are interested in that sort of thing. But yeah, hopefully this was a informative video for you all. Thank you all so much for watching, and peace out.